Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Carl Jung. This is Mysterium Conjunctionis. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, the link for my book, and the link to get in contact with me directly so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Mysterium Conjunctionis with Chapter 4, Part 6, The King as Anthropos. Anthropos is changing something into a human-like shape. Anthropomorphizing God is making God have a human conception. Anthropomorphizing animals is giving animals human characteristics, just so we have terminology. Alright, I have drawn attention earlier, that is a reference to another book, to the passage in Hippolytus where the Gnostic interpretation of Psalm 24, 7 through 10 is discussed. The rhetorical question of the psalm, who is this King of glory, is answered in Hippolytus thus: a worm and no man, the reproach of men and the outcast of the people. Footnote 334. This is another quotation, namely from Psalm 21:7. It is interesting that this psalm begins with the words, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? An indication that the transformation of the King of Glory into the least of his creatures is felt as abandonment by God. The words are the same as Matthew 27:46, Elah, Elah, lama sabachthani. That is because this was something trying to shoehorn its way into that. We did not do a study of the Psalms whenever we did the Bible study. I skipped that. I skipped Proverbs as well. I skipped a lot of things that weren't pertinent to whether it was actually divine revelation or not. The Psalms are great. They are wonderful songs, but they are just songs. The Proverbs are wonderful. They are good wisdom, but they are just a collection of wise sayings. That was not necessary to the understanding of whether it was divine or not. No. And so we skipped it. So I'm not going to try to say what Psalm 21 was, or what was the other one, Psalm 47:24. This could be a good reference. It could not. It's probably not. But again, I just didn't do the work. So he is the King of glory, mighty in battle. This passage, says Hippolytus, refers to Adam and his ascension and rebirth, that he may be born spiritual, not fleshly. Footnote, we're coming back at footnote 338. The worm, therefore, signifies the second Adam, Christ. Epiphanius also mentioned the worm as an allegory of Christ, though without substantiating it further. That is because it is, again, just trying to shoehorn something in there. That self-assertion really does come to bite you in the ass if you are not taking into account that that is what you are doing, right? We think that the scripture means this thing, and so we read back into scripture what we expect to see out of it, like see the virgin prophecy. That is a bad way of doing it. And this is that, right? Epiphanius mentioning the worm as an allegory of Christ was trying to shoehorn into the allegory of the worm Christ, and it doesn't fit. This train of thought is consciously or unconsciously continued in alchemy. The Aquarium Sapientium says, and firstly, it is here to be noted that the sages have called this decomposed product, on account of his blackness, Canticle 1, the raven's head. In the same way Christ, Isaiah 53, Christ was not in the book of Isaiah, had no form nor comeliness, was the vilest of all men, full of griefs and sicknesses, and so despised that men even hid their faces from him, and he was esteemed as nothing. This is a complete and total misrepresentation of Isaiah 53. If that is confusing to you, fall back to Isaiah right? I have the Bible study. We have read through the entirety of Isaiah in extreme detail. We have done word studies. Christ is not in Isaiah. Yea, in the 22nd Psalm, the Vulgate, he complains of this, that he is a worm and no man, the laughingstock and contempt of the people. Indeed, it is not unfitly compared with Christ when the putrefied body of the Son lies dead, inactive, like ashes, in the bottom of the vial, until as a result of greater heat, its soul by degrees and little by little descends to it again, and once more infuses, moistens, and saturates the decaying, and all but dead body, and preserves it from total destruction. So also did it happen to Christ himself, when at the Mount of Olives and on the cross he was roasted by the fire of divine wrath. 338 and 339. Acetus, the word used by the alchemist to denote the roasting of ore, and 339 is the fire of divine wrath, suggests Bohm, divine fire wrath fire. I do not know whether there is a direct connection between them. In our treatise, God's wrath falling upon Christ turns against God himself. That is because you do not understand in the slightest the things that you are discussing. Boehm discusses this question in Aurora, and questions Theosophicae, and says that on the one hand, the wrath fire comes from the dryness, one of the 7 qualities of creation. On the other hand, it is connected with the first principle of divine revelation, the darkness which reaches into the fire. The fire is hidden in the center of the light as well as in all creatures, and was kindled by Lucifer, the light bringer. There was no point of divine wrath about the cross. Like, even if you take it as literal, which I do not, right? There was no need for a redemptive sacrifice. Therefore, any redemptive sacrifice is automatically null. Therefore, it is not God's will that it happens. He can use the circumstances by which it happens, and he did, as an example of forgiveness. For example, I see you, Jason. But other than that, there was no wrath involved in that. There was not God's wrath that was coming down upon his son, which, yeah, okay. There's a lot of problems. Once again, fall back to the Bible study, but there was no point of that at all where Christ was lit on fire or faced divine wrath. It just didn't happen. He faced human wrath. He faced injustice. He faced all kinds of persecution, granted, but that was not divine wrath. Divine wrath comes in the form of fire falling from the sky, or you dying in misery, getting swallowed up by the earth, possibly, like Moses did. Right? He swallowed some people up with the earth. He killed his sister because they disagreed about him dating a black chick. Right? There's a lot of things in there. There's a lot of things to dig out. There was no divine wrath on the Mount of Olives. Right? Even if it was part of the plan, even if it was divinely ordained that he had to be sacrificed in this manner to put an end to the blood sacrifice, even if that was possible, right? That wasn't wrath. That was the plan. How was it wrath to do the plan that God put into place? How was that his wrath? Was he contemplating wrath? Well, that's not the nature of God. And so, lots of problems. By the fire of divine wrath, Matthew 26:27, and complained that he was utterly deserted by his heavenly Father, yet nonetheless was always, as is wont to happen to an earthly body through assiduous care and nourishing, comforted and strengthened, Matthew 4, Luke 22, and so to speak imbued, nourished, and supported with divine nectar. Yea, when at last in his most sacred passion, and at the hour of his death, his strength and his very spirit were completely withdrawn from him, and he went down to the lowest and deepest parts below the earth. This is definitely something that was written. Once again, I will point out that hell is not intrinsic to the Jewish faith. This is from Acts 1, Ephesians 1, and 1 Peter 3. Yet, even there he was preserved, refreshed, and by the power of the eternal Godhead raised up again, quickened, and glorified. Romans 14. It is also interesting to note that this is not consecutive actions, right? This is scattered all over the place, and you have to put it together. And there is a reason for that. when finally his spirit, with its body dead in the sepulchre, obtained a perfect and indissoluble union through his most joyful resurrection and victorious ascension into heaven as Lord and Christ, Matthew 28, and was exalted, Mark 16, to the right hand of his Father, with whom, through the power and virtue of the Holy Spirit as true God and man, he reigns and rules over all things in equal power and glory. I dismiss all of that. Psalm 8. And by his most powerful word preserveth and upholdeth all things. Hebrews 1. And maketh all things one. Acts 17. And this wondrous union and divine exaltation, angels and men, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, Philippians 2, 1 Peter 1, can scarce comprehend, far less meditate upon, without fear and terror, and his virtue, power, and roseate tincture. Footnote 340. The rose-colored tincture brings Christ in connection with the lion. Okay. The roseate tincture is able even now to change and tint and yet more perfectly to cure and heal us sinful men in body and soul, of which things we simply have more to say below. Thus, then, we have briefly and simply considered the unique heavenly foundation and cornerstone, Jesus Christ. That is to say, how he is compared and united with the earthly philosophical stone of the sages, whose material and preparation, as we have heard, is an outstanding type and lifelike image of the incarnation of Christ. That is all an assumption. Every single bit of that. Right? It is no secret over here that I follow God through the Spirit as led by the Spirit in service to the Spirit, which is all of creation, without any need for a redemptive Savior to intervene between me and God. I believe that the entire concept that someone in any shape or form could be that intermediary is foolish, right? It is better for you to assume the position of authority in your own life. It is better for you to go directly to God to seek forgiveness than to go to a priest, than to go to anybody, right? It is better for you to do the internal work, the internal self-reflection, to take responsibility for your own life, than it is to place that upon someone else. And Christianity is placing all of that upon someone else. And for me, that is going to be an absolute no, right off the top. Now, I have done an extensive Bible study where I took off a certain pair of glasses. That pair of glasses has two lenses. One of the lenses is that the Jews were the chosen people. I do not believe that at all. And the other one was that Christ had to die for your sins. And then I read the book with that lens taken off, and it turns out that it did not say what I thought it said at all. That is what the Bible study brought us to. That is why, when I say that I dismiss this, it is not idle. I have spent a significant amount of time on public record dealing with these ideas from the direct source and from other sources, like we are doing right here. All of this is an investigation into what the truth might be. And one of the things that we learned in the Bible study from the Bible is that while it does contain truth, it is not the truth. If any of that is a problem for you, see the Bible study. There are 161 videos of me reading the Bible, and there's 2 videos of me discussing what I learned from it. Take the time. And so for all of this is just completely arbitrary, right? All of these references that are taken from the New Testament were created with intention to create a religion. That religion is Christianity. The guardrails were created by the book, right? That is the control system. That's what that means. And so that is, they took from the stories that surrounded them, just like the Old Testament did, and assimilated them into the story that they wanted to create. The virgin birth was taken from other sources. It was not taken from Isaiah. There is no prophecy of a virgin birth in Isaiah. It is not a thing. Most of the prophecies that have been attached to Jesus Christ were not meant that way in the beginning, in the Old Testament at all. They were not looking for Christ in the way that he came at all. And so there is an intrinsic problem with the understanding of that religion. And that's where I'm going to leave this, right? All of this to me is a self-insertion. Every single bit of this was something that they assimilated from other places as necessary in order to do, right? We'll hit one more thing. The first three books, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke. Those three books are, two of them are derivative from one, right? Mark, it's Matthew, Mark, yeah. Mark was written for Alexandria, which is in Egypt. That was his market. That was what he was writing that particular book from. And then Matthew got a hold of Mark's book, and he was writing for the people in Ethiopia. So he wrote the story a little bit differently for the people in Ethiopia. Luke did the same thing. He took Mark's book and he wrote what was needed for Greece and Cappadocia. That is how it happened, right? It is almost certain that Mark was written first, probably 100 to 150 years after the death of Christ, which would put it probably at a third person best point of view, right? Not anybody that actually studied with Jesus, but possibly somebody that studied with somebody that studied with Jesus, right? That is a problem. There is a degree of separation right there that is going to lose some intrinsic understanding. All of that to say that the Gospels were purpose written for three different markets, and they did exactly what they were supposed to do. There is significant reason to believe that Mark was first, the other two were derivative, but added extra things into it. And now we will return to the text. The various fatalities which the old king has to suffer, immersion in the bath or in the sea, dissolution and decomposition, extinction of his light in the darkness, incineration in the fire, and renewal out of chaos, are derived by the alchemist from the dissolution of the matter in acids, from the roasting of ores, the expulsion of sulfur or mercury, the reduction of metallic oxides, and so forth. As if these chemical procedures yielded a picture which, with a little straining of the imagination, could be compared with Christ's sufferings and his final triumph. The fact that they projected the passion as an unconscious premise into the chemical transformations was not at all clear to the alchemist. Footnote 341. We have an amusing example of this tendency in Dom Pernety, who demonstrates the alchemical nature of ancient mythology without seeing that this was the matrix from which the alchemical ideas arose. Naturally, under these circumstances, they were able to prove with complete success that their alleged observations coincided with the passion. Only it was not a question of their making observations on matter, but of introspection. Since, however, genuine projections are never voluntarily made, but always appear as pre-conscious factors, there must have been something in the unconscious of the alchemist which lent itself to projection. An example had a tendency to become conscious because of its energy charge, and on the other hand, found in the alchemical operations a hook that attracted it so that it could express itself in some way. Projection is always an indirect process of becoming conscious, indirect because of the check exercised by the conscious mind, by the pressure of traditional or conventional ideas, which may take the place of real experience and prevent it from happening. One feels that one possesses a valid truth concerning the unknown, and this makes any real knowledge of it impossible. The unconscious factor must necessarily have been something that was incompatible with the conscious attitude. What it was in reality we learned from the statements of the alchemist, a myth that had much in common not only with many mythologians of pagan origin, but above all with Christian dogma. And see, this is the problem, right? He is coming from. Now, I haven't stopped any of this because this is all speculation. This is all him speculating about where the idea of alchemy came from. But this last part right here, we have to address because this is the problem that I was addressing before. A myth that has much in common not only with the many mythologians of pagan, but above all with Christian dogma, is exactly backwards, right? These mythologians of pagan origin, were quite literally pre-existent to the myth of Christ. The myth of Christ assimilated all of these mythologians into its myth. And that is the problem with it, right? That is one of the major problems with it. They're the major problems. And this is exactly it, right? This is exactly the problem. Because he is assuming that because he comes from a Christian background that is valid. And it's not. If it were identical with the dogma and appeared in projection, it would show that the alchemist had a thoroughly anti-Christian attitude, which was not the case. And once again, I will point out that they almost certainly did, right? They almost certainly did have an anti-Christian attitude, because there is no part of this process which will lead you closer to Christ. But what we see from their writings, see the various playlists, is that they couched their language to be acceptable to the control system, which was the Catholic Church, who has an extreme history of violence. Catholicism was spread either by the sword directly or by the sword by threat. You were burned, torn apart by horses, put into various torture devices if you did not comport with the Catholic Church. That is why the alchemists didn't appear to have an anti-Christian dogma. It is because they were scared for their lives. They had discovered something which is beneficial to your life. But if you don't hide that, if you don't couch that and form secret societies to share this knowledge without the knowledge of the church, then the church would kill you. In no uncertain terms, anything that I talk about on this channel would have gotten me killed by the Catholic Church, because they cannot have an example of positive, an example of morals outside of their dogma. It is almost certain that at least Dorn, right? At least some of these guys who knew probably did have an anti-Christian attitude. And it is evident from the writing, right, that they were just covering up their beliefs enough so that it would pass by the Christian muster. Back to the text. Lacking such an attitude, a projection of this kind would be psychologically impossible. But if the unconscious complex represented a figure that deviated from the dogma in certain essential features, then its projection becomes possible, for it would then be in opposition to the dogma approved by consciousness and would have arisen by way of compensation. In this and my other writings, I have constantly stressed the peculiar nature of the alchemist statements, and need not recapitulate what I have said. I should only like to point out that the central idea of the Filius Philosophorum is based on a conception of the Anthropos, in which the man, or the Son of Man, does not coincide with the Christian historical Redeemer figure. Yes, to point out that the central idea of the Filium Philosophium, which is brother thinking, is based on the conception of the Anthropos, does not coincide with the Christian historical Redeemer figure. That is true. The alchemical Anthropos comes closer to the Basilidian conception of him as reported by Hippolytus. For he, the Redeemer, is in their view the inner spiritual man in the psychic, which is the sonship that had left the soul here not to die, but to remain according to its nature, just as the first sonship left behind on high, the Holy Ghost, who is conterminous with him in the appropriate place, clothing himself in his own soul. Footnote 342. All right, we will be back here at 348. The inner spiritual man bears a resemblance to Christ. That is, the unconscious premise for the statements about the Filius Regius. This idea contradicts the dogmatic view and therefore has every reason to be repressed and projected. This, right, the inner spiritual man bears a resemblance to Christ. That is the words written in red, not necessarily the things that were spoken about him. The unconscious premise for the statements about the Filius Regius. This contradicts the dogmatic view and therefore has every reason to be repressed and projected. One of the things that I discovered in my Bible study was that when you start to discover that the things that you are reading does not comport with what society has told you that it says, there is a tendency to stop. Right? If you followed the Bible study at all, I stopped for a few months when I got to the point that I realized that. It took an effort for me to come back and finish that particular study because of this, right? It is very easy to repress the feelings and the findings that you have based on empirical evidence due to the societal pressure of other people believing it. It is something that needs to be overcome. At the same time, it is the logical consequence of a spiritual situation in which the historical figure had long since disappeared from consciousness, while his spiritual presence was stressed all the more strongly in the form of the inner Christ, or God who is born in the soul of man. The outward fact of the dogmatic Christ was answered from within by that inner primordial image which had produced a Purusha, or a Gaiomart, long before the Christian era and made the assimilation of the Christian revelation possible. The ultimate fate of every dogma is that it gradually becomes soulless. Life wants to create new forms, and therefore, when dogma loses its vitality, it must, perforce, activate the archetype that has always helped man to express the mystery of the soul. Note that I do not go so far as to say that the archetype actually produces the divine figure. If the psychologist were to assert that, he would have to possess a sure knowledge of the motives that underlie all historical development and be in a position to demonstrate this knowledge. But there is no question of that. I maintain only that the psychic archetype makes it possible for the divine figure to take form and become accessible to understanding. But the supremely important motive power which is needed for this and which sets the archetypal possibilities in motion at a given historical moment cannot be explained in terms of the archetype itself. Only experience can establish which archetype has become operative, but one can never predict that it must enter into manifestation. Who, for instance, could logically have foretold that the Jewish prophet Jesus would give the decisive answer to the spiritual situation in the age of Hellenistic syncretism, or that the slumbering image of the Anthropos would waken to world dominion? All right. Nobody, absolutely nobody would have foretold this, most especially anybody that was actually Jewish, right? But in addition to that, it did not give a decisive answer to a spiritual situation. It did not. It gave a temporary reprieve to some horrible things, but even that was perverted beyond all comprehension. By the time of the foundation of the true Catholic Church, by Constantine, right, by the time of that, it had already lost everything that it was intended to be. And so it was not built around him in the way that it probably would have been if not for that control system coming to be. The limitations of human knowledge, which leave so many incomprehensible and wonderful things unexplained, do not, however, exempt us from the task of trying to understand the revelations of that spirit that are embodied in dogma. Otherwise, there is a danger that the treasures of supreme knowledge which lie hidden in it will evaporate into nothing and become a bloodless phantom, an easy prey for all shallow rationalists. It would be a great step forward, in my opinion, if at least it was recognized how far the truth of dogma is rooted in the human psyche, which is not the work of human hands. I don't disagree with that, right? Dogma is intrinsically rooted into control, and that is part of the human psyche. The inner spiritual man of the Gnostics is the Anthropos, the man created in the image of the nous. That is a fundamental problem, and we have discussed before. Putting physical attributes of humanity onto God is an assumption that we make because we can reason. Because we have the capacity to self-reflect, we assume that God has our shape. There is no reason to believe that. None. There is no reason to believe that God has the physical shape of a man or a woman or a hermaphrodite, that it has the physical shape of any animal, that it has the physical shape of anything that you have ever placed your eyes upon. There is no reason to believe that. There is the assumption that is made by men, in the conceit of men, that God has to look like men, even though they fully acknowledge that there are entities that are above them, right? Angels are listed as above. Many of them do not comport at all with the physical description given as a human, right? Some of them do, but many of them do not. And that is another one of those intrinsic problems. And so, putting upon God the infinite, undefined void from which all came, the physical characteristics of a man in any way, shape, or form whatsoever, is doing a disservice to the God. Now, I do that, right? I say that God wanted to create. That is a desire that I associate with God, but that is a desire that I understand because of humanity. I do not, however, try to limit God into the visage of a human. That is a bad idea. This anthropomorphication of God, right? We have to do a certain degree of that, right? What I do, God thinks, right? That is an anthropomorphication. We don't know that God thinks. It may be that God knows without thinking. It may be a whole variety of things. We make assumptions. The worst assumption that you can make out of all of this is that God is only good. That is a bad assumption. Or that God is a person. That is another bad assumption. There is no reason to believe either one of those. The true man. He corresponds to the Qinyan, true man of Chinese alchemy. The Qinyan is the product of the opus. On the one hand, he is the adept who is transformed by the work. On the other, he is the homunculus, or Phileas, of Western alchemy, who also derives from the true man. The treatise of Wai Po Yang says, "The ear, the eye, and the mouth constitute the three precious things. They should be closed to stop communication. The true man, living in a deep abyss, floats about the center of the round vessel. The mind is relegated to the realm of non-existence, so as to acquire an enduring state of thoughtlessness. When the mind is integral, it will not go astray. In its sleep, it will be in God's embrace, but during its waking hours, it is anxious about the continuation or termination of its existence." Do you know what this is? This is the state of meditation. The ear, the eye, and the mouth constitute the three precious things. That can be, right? That can be a representative of the Trinity. It's not a good one, but it can be. They should be closed to stop communication. That is the indicator of what is happening here, right? You are neither seeing, hearing, nor speaking anything. You are not communicating with the visible world, the audible world, or the spoken world. The true man, living in a deep abyss, floats about the center of the round vessel. I wonder what that round vessel could possibly be. What could possibly be construed as a round vessel that you would be contained in? I wonder if maybe I've got an example of what that could possibly constitute already written down in a book. The mind is relegated to the realm of non-existence. See Chapter 5. So as to acquire an enduring state of thoughtlessness. When the mind is integral, it will not go astray. This is the meditative state. This right here is a description of meditation. Not prayer. Prayer is the active part of it. Asking, receiving, moving energies, any of that is prayer. Meditation is the stillness of the mind. It is removing all thought, all cognition, all sight, all sound, all smell, all of it. Right? You are blending into the oneness, becoming non-existence. That is part of the process. This to me is blatantly obvious. This is not what he thinks it is. When the mind is integral, it will not go astray. That is part of the meditative process, the quieting of the mind. In its sleep, it will be in God's embrace. That's fine, I don't dream. But during its waking hours, it's anxious about the continuation or termination of its existence. This however, is not awakened, right? When you get to the point where you are worried or no longer worried about the continuation or termination, right? Not that you seek the end of your life, but that you no longer fear it, then it is possible that you have awakened. Until that point, it is not. It's not even in the realm of possibility. Until you have passed that point in the process, it is not. This true man is Dorn's vir unus, and at the same time the lapis philosophorum. Footnote 348. It is highly remarkable that there should be an anthropos doctrine in China where the basic philosophical assumptions are so very different. That is because it is not. You have completely misunderstood this entire reference. It has nothing to do, right? This is the achievement of the true man, the inner self, the enlightenment process. This is not necessarily talking about the anthropos at all. The true man expresses the anthropos in the individual human being. No, it doesn't. Compared with the revelation of the Son of Man in Christ, this seems like a retrograde step. There's a lot of retrograde there. For the historical uniqueness of the incarnation was the great advance which gathered the scattered sheep about one shepherd. Did it though? Did it? Is all of the sheep around the one true shepherd? I'm just saying. Is there no Islam? Is there no Judaism? Is there no Buddhism? Is there no Hinduism? Is there no Zoroastrianism? Get where I'm going with this? We have not indeed gathered the scattered sheep about one shepherd. That did not happen. It got close, right? The Catholic Church exerted a lot of control, but in order to do so, they had to give you Ishtar, right? They had to give you Saturnalia. They had to give you all of these things, right? They couched them. They clothed them in other things. Ishtar is now Easter. Saturnalia is now Christmas. But they're still there. You still do the things. Why do you hide eggs? Why is there a rabbit attached to Easter? What does that have to do with Christ? Absolutely nothing. And yes, I know that there are people out there who try to make it fit. Well, the egg symbolizes rebirth. Bullshit. That's a fucking lie. It takes more than 3 days for an egg to hatch. It takes more than 3 days to find out that they're fertilized. It takes a lot more. Right? There is no reason for a bunny to be there. None. That has everything to do with Ishtar. And by the way, Ishtar and Esther, the exact same word. Back to the text. The man in the individual would mean it is feared. It's a scattering of the flock. This would indeed be a retrograde step. But it cannot be blamed on the true man. Its cause is rather all of those bad human qualities which have always threatened and hindered the work of civilization. Often, indeed, the sheep and the shepherd are just about equally inept. The true man has nothing to do with this. Above all, he will destroy no valuable cultural form, since he himself is the highest form of culture. Neither in the East nor in the West does he play the game of shepherd and sheep, because he has enough to do to be a shepherd to himself. If the adept experiences his own self, the true man in his works, then, as the passage from the Aquarium Sapientium shows, he encounters the analogy of the true man, Christ, in new and direct form, and he recognizes the transformation in which he himself is involved in a similarity to the Passion. That is only partially true, right? There is definitely an awakening process. There is the becoming of the true man. I feel like I am on that path, if not towards the end of it, right? That is never going to be at the end. I am fully aware. There is always a refining process. But I have enough knowledge to be well along the road. I am more in alignment with my true self than I have ever been. I am stepping into my authority in ways that has never been considered ever in my life. And so I am, in a way, becoming the true man. That is the point of the process. That is the point of the process. To step into your self-authority, right? There is no part of that that is mirrored in Christ. Yes, he did set some good examples, but he also set some bad ones, right? The analogy of give away all that you own, not great. The never have sex and children, not great. There are other things along the way that are equally not great. There are plenty of great things. Forgive your brother, love your brother. That's a good one. The whole of the law summed up as love the Lord thy God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, and love your brother as yourself. That works. That is good shit right there. There's a lot of other stuff that is not so much, right? Not a jot nor tittle will be taken away. Well, that means that you are still supposed to hit people in the head with stones if they pick up sticks on the wrong day. That is a problem. You should not do that. That is a major problem. One of the major problems, but not the only one. And so, while there is, in this experience, something that is very close to what is attributed to Christ, I don't say the fullness, right? I haven't laid hands on anybody else and healed them. I've only healed myself. I have affected some things outside of myself, but those were mostly dealing with things that could be subjectively looked at as other things. And so I don't stand on it as though I am some wonderful miracle worker, but I have healed myself in at least 4 ways. That's a big deal to me, right? That indicates to me that I am on the right path, that I am seeking the right things, that I am doing the right things, because all of the healing has unfolded from taking those steps. And none of those, not a single one of my steps had anything to do with Christ other than investigating to dismiss that story. So, yeah. It is not an imitation of Christ, but it's the exact opposite. An assimilation of the Christ image with his own self, which is the true man. And that is a lot closer to what I believe than what has been talked about before. Footnote 349. Who, nota bene, is not to be confused with the ego. Right? Now, the ego is the part that makes the decisions within you. It is your will, it is your soul making the decisions. The main contention that is surrounding the ego is the fact that there is an outside voice, right? You make decisions based upon the voice that you hear. That voice is either guiding you towards the correct or guiding you towards the bad. Equally, it's dependent upon you and your alignment, which way that voice is going to bring you. If you are aligned for the betterment of humankind, it will align you in that direction. If you are not, you will hear the voice that leads you away. You will hear that regardless of any point of this. You know when you do something wrong, right? If you steal from somebody and that voice inside your head says you should not have done that, that is the voice of God. That is the other side of the ego. That is the part that influences the ego, but the ego makes the decisions. That voice can tell you, this is a bad thing, you should not do it, and you can choose to ignore that, right? That is where many of the problems of the understanding of the ego comes from, because of that outside voice. But it's 2 sides of the coin, right? You are a representative of the divine. Not the divine in and of itself, but a small part, individualized out from God into this vessel. Your soul commands this vessel. The Spirit carries out those commands. You have the capacity to make the decisions for yourself. That individualization of your soul into making those decisions is one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin is the internal influence that comes from the divine. These things are not separable, but they are identified differently, right? One is the ego, the part that makes the decisions, and then there is the divine, which is the counterpoint of the ego on that scale that would even comport with the divine chakra, which is the divine telling you what to do, and you get to make that decision based upon your wants. And so it should not be confused with the ego, right? The true man is what you would become by listening to the divine voice and making the choices with your ego. Then you become the true man. At no point is the ego actually the true man itself. And I know that can be a little bit complicated, but hopefully I explained that well enough. It is no longer an effort, an intentional straining after imitation, but rather an involuntary experience of the reality represented by the sacred legend. That, right? I've talked before about this process has removed some things from me. I used to enjoy watching TV and movies, right? This process removed that from me. Once I got to the point where I was at enlightenment, understanding these things, I can just see something on TV and it physically repulses me, right? It is no longer an effort, an intentional straining to imitate the ability to identify horrible things, right? And that is what is mostly on TV, right? Glorification of sex, violence, and alcohol or drugs is intrinsic to watching TV these days. You cannot get away from it. Whether that is straight sex or gay sex, whether that is legal drugs or illegal drugs, no matter what, you cannot get away from that. And for me, when I see that, it is a physical repulsion. My entire body is like, no. So I can't watch TV, right? I can't. I've tried. It is an unpleasant experience for me and everyone around me. It is no longer an involuntary experience, or it's no longer an effort, but instead an involuntary experience of the reality represented. Now, you lose me at the sacred legend, right? But everything else I'm with. This reality comes upon him in his work just as the stigmata came to the saints without being consciously sought. You think? I was not there. I do not know all of the recordings. I do not have the full understanding of all of the saints. I do not even want it. But I will go so far as to venture that free will is a thing, and that unless you are at least subconsciously desiring it, it would not happen. But almost certainly, you had to have been consciously seeking it. They appear spontaneously, but only to certain people who happen to be fanatically devoted to the religion. That's just something that just happens. The passion happens to the adept, not in its classic form, otherwise he would be consciously performing spiritual exercises, but in the form expressed in the alchemical myth. It is the arcane substance that suffers those physical and mortal tortures. It is the king who dies or is killed, is dead and buried, and on the third day rises again. And it is not the adept who suffers all this, rather it suffers in him. It is tortured. It passes through death and rises again. All of this happens not to the alchemist himself, but to the true man. That is, not to the physical incarnation, the alchemist himself, but to the soul, the ego, the true man, right? Who he feels is near him and in him, and at the same time in the retort. The passion that vibrates in our text and in the aurora is genuine, but it would be totally incomprehensible if the lapis was nothing but a chemical substance, nor does it originate in the contemplation of Christ's passion. It is the real experience of a man who has got involved in the compensatory contents of the unconscious by investigating the unknown, seriously and to the point of self-sacrifice. He could not but see the likeness of its projected contents to the dogmatic images, and he might have been tempted to assume that his ideas were nothing else than the familiar religious conceptions, which he was using in order to explain the chemical procedure. But the text clearly show that, on the contrary, a real experience of the opus had an increasing tendency to assimilate the dogma and to amplify itself with it. That is why the text says that Christ was compared and united with the stone. The alchemical anthropos showed itself to be independent of any dogma. Footnote 350. A reverse process set in the 17th century exemplified most clearly in bone. The aquarium sapientium represents the critical point between the two. After that, the dogmatic figure of Christ began to predominate and enriched itself with alchemical ideas, because that is what that control system does, is assimilate other things. The alchemist experienced the anthropos in a form that was imbued with new vitality, freshness, and immediacy, and this is reflected in the enthusiastic tone of the texts. It is therefore understandable that every single detail of the primordial drama would be realized in quite a new sense. The Negretto not only brought decay, suffering, death, and the torments of hell visibly before the eyes of the alchemist, it also cast the shadow of its melancholy over his own solitary soul. Footnote 351, as Mauranius says, "For the entry into rest is exceeding narrow, and no man can enter therein save by affliction of the soul." If you've been around for a while, you have heard me talk about this. I am on a narrow path, right? The inability to watch TV or movies is part of that, right? There are requirements to the path that I have to follow, or I am no longer on the path. I cannot be sexually deviant. I cannot act out of wrath. I cannot act out of greed. I cannot act out of any of the virtues or the vices to exclusivity. I have to walk the balance. It is part of it, and that is an exceedingly narrow thing. It is hard, especially in this day and age, to remain faithful and true to all of the things, but that is the path. It is narrow. It is hard. The gate is not wide. The wide gate, that is the one where someone can die for you and redeem you from your sins. That's a wide gate. The gate where you are responsible for your own sins and that you have to take that responsibility to yourself, that is a narrow gate. There is a difference between the two, and indeed, the entry is narrow. Back to the text. In the blackness of a despair which was not his own, and of which he was merely the witness, he experienced how it turned into the worm and the poisonous dragon. Footnote 352. There is in our chemistry a sudden noble substance which moves from lord to lord. Verus mercuri spiritus and sulphurus anima are parallels to dragon and eagle, king and lion, spirit and body, above and below, as explained many times. The Cinex Draco must be reborn as the king. King and queen are represented with a dragon's tail. There, on page 38, it is said that a black worm and dragon comes from the king and queen in the Negretto. The worm, Phaeton, sucks the king's blood. From the inner necessity, the dragon destroyed itself and changed into the lion. 353. Since the alchemical symbols are saturated with astrology, it is important to know that the chief star in LIGO is called Regulus, Little King, and that the Chaldeans regarded it as the lion's heart. Regulus is a favorable sign at the birth of kings. Heart is one of the names of the arcane substance. It signifies fire, or any great heat. Fire would be a representative of the Logos, which is indeed the arcane substance. Changed into the lion, and the adept, drawn involuntarily into the drama, then felt the need to cut off its paws. Footnote 354. Psychology and alchemy. Unless there were two lions who devoured one another. The dragons ate its own wings as the eagle did its own feathers. 355 is... What is going on here? See the eagle with his head of a king consuming his feathers in Ripley's Grouse, Psychology and Alchemy. These grotesque images reflect the conflict of opposites which the researcher's curiosity had led him. His work began with Catabasis, a journey to the underworld as Dante also experienced it. Footnote 356. So far, I have found no reference to Dante in any of the text. I have done the works of Dante. That was the first non-biblical work that we did, I believe. We did the Descent, we did the Purgatory, and we did the Ascent. There is some knowledge to be pulled from at least one of those three. It is possible that Dante had a spiritual experience, but it appears more likely that he was describing things in accordance with the dogma that was attached. The middle part of that, the purgatory part, appears to be part of the process of self-revelation, at least. The other two, one is teaching you that you can create a hell for yourself, or you can create a heaven for yourself, but that it is of your own creation. That was what we got from Dante. You are more than welcome to go and check it out. It is part of the Ancient Lore playlist, and it has its own. A journey to the underworld, as Dante also experienced it, with the difference that the adept soul was not only impressed by it, but radically altered. Faust 1 is an example of this, the transformation of an earnest scholar, through his pact with the devil, into a worldly cavalier and crooked careerist. In the case of the fanciful Christian Rosencreutz, the descent to Venus led only to his being slightly wounded in the hand by Cupid's arrow. The text, however, hinted at more serious dangers. Olympiodorus says, footnote 357, from Berthelot, without great pains this work is not perfected. There will be struggles, violence, and war, and all the while the demon of Ophiuchus. Footnote 358. It is difficult to explain why the constellation Ophiuchus is called a demon. Astronomically, he stands on Scorpio and is therefore connected astrologically with poison and physicians. And indeed, in the ancient world, he signified Asclepios. Hippolytus states that whereas the constellation Inganassi represents Adam and his labors, and hence the first creation, Ophiuchus represents the second creation or rebirth through Christ, since he prevents the serpent from reaching the crown. Corona Borealis, the wreath of Adrian, the beloved of Dionysus. This interpretation does not fit badly with the savior Asclepios, but since, according to the ancients, snake charmers are born under this constellation, a nefarious connotation may have crept in, also perhaps through the poisonous Scorpio. It is important to note, even though it is not necessarily intrinsic to anything, that there is a 13th constellation, and it would be this one. Ophiuchus is, I think, what it's called now, but that is close enough to understand. While the demon Ophiuchus instills negligence, impeding our intentions. Everywhere he creeps about, both within and without, causing oversights, anxiety, and unexpected accidents, or else keeping us from the work by harassments and injuries. The philosopher Petacios, quoted by Olympiodorus, expresses himself even more strongly. So bedeviled and shameless is the lead, 359. 359 is another name for the arcane substance. So bedeviled and shameless is the lead that all who wish to investigate it fall into madness through ignorance. It is important to note that if you are melting lead, there are fumes that are given off which do indeed lead to madness. So if you are doing it in ignorance, you will indeed fall into madness. Mad Hatter's disease. This is not just empty talk, is shown by other texts, which no, that was mercury, not lead, my bad. But like the reason we no longer use lead in pain is because of that. I mean, it does have severe detrimental effects, one of which is to become madness, or to become mad. This is not just empty talk, as shown by other texts, which often emphasize how much psyche of the laborant was involved in the work. Thus, Dorn, commenting on the quotation from Hermes, all obscurity shall yield before thee, says, it is important to note that Dorn is one of those people that I am fairly sure actually had the throne room experience. For he saith, all obscurity shall yield before thee, he saith not before the metals. Oh! By obscurity is to be understood naught else but the darkness of disease and sickness of body and mind. The author's intention is, in sum, to teach that there are adepts in spirit medicine how with a very small dose, such as is suggested by a grain of a mustard seed, however it be taken to cure all diseases indifferently, by reason of the simplicity of union, effective in the medicine. Footnote 361. Unionis simplicatus refers probably to the doctrine of res simplex, signifying the Platonic idea. The simple is that which Plato calls the intelligible, not the sensible. The sensible is the unexpected part. It is indivisible and of one essence. The soul is simplex. The work is not brought to perfection unless it ends in the simple. The conversion of the elements to the simple. Man is most worthy of living things and nearest to the simple, and this because of his intelligence. Quotations from Liber Platonis Quotorum. By reason of the simplicity of union effective in the medicine, so that no variety of the multitude of maladies may resist it, but manifold as are the obscurities of weaknesses of the mind, as insanity, mania, frenzy, stupidity, and others like, by which the spirit, animus, is darkened and impaired, yet by this single spirited medicine they are perfectly cured. That is talking about the enlightenment process. Now, once again, I will point out that I have not done external healing, right? Not to a great degree, not to verifiable effect. I have, however, healed myself. It was not as dramatic as what you would see listed in the Bible. For example, I had a cyst in my throat for a couple of years. I was not able to talk at any volume or with any variation at all. My vocal cords were stretched in that process. I have healed the cyst. I am in the process of healing the throat, the vocal cords themselves. The cyst was not done medically, right? There was no reason to assume that anything that I did other than the meditative practices had anything to do with it. The shoulder and the back, you can make the arguments that the physical exercise allowed that to happen. The throat is definitely not part of that. Right? The throat was something completely different. I don't believe that it was just the exercise that fixed my back. I was walking for a couple of years before the change happened that allowed me to start running. Right? That was a physical miracle. Right? The taking away of the pain of every single step, I cannot believe came simply because I was walking a couple of miles a day. Right? I wasn't doing the extra exercises. I wasn't doing my crunches or my push-ups or my leg lifts or my dips or any of that. All I did was walk, and it was painful every step of the way until I got to a certain point in this process, and then the pain was gone. Perfectly cured. That doesn't mean that I don't occasionally get some pain if I overextend, but I do not wake up at a 7 every day like I did prior to this. I say all of that to say, that is this spagyric medicine, this medicine of this one source that cures all ails. There are caveats to that. There are bottlenecks. There are experiences that you will go through. Some of those may be illness. Even if you are on this path, right, I have healed myself in 4 different ways. It is entirely possible, not likely, but possible, that I can come down with cancer and die in a month. That is still within the realm of possibility, even though I have done miraculous things. It doesn't cure everything, and everything is not perfectly cured, at least in the way that I do it. But the way that I do it does bring about healing. It does bring about cure, right? Maybe not perfect cure, but definitely curing some ills. I've healed myself in 4 ways. And those are all, to me, absolute. Back to the text. And it not only restores health to the spirit, but also sharpens the ingenuity and mind of men, that all things may be miraculously easy for them in understanding and perception, and nothing be hid from them which is in the upper or lower world. 362 and 363. 362. They found the virtue, power of it, truth, to be such that it performed miracles. And the next one is just a physico trismegisty. And now I will point out, right, the other day we were like, oh yeah, Dorn had the throne room experience, right? I was at the point from what he wrote that I was like, yes, this is absolutely a description of the throne room experience. This entire paragraph, written in the way that it is entirely suggestive of that as well. This, written as it is, lets me know, just as well as the throne room experience one did, that he knew what he was talking about, that he had at least somewhat of the same understanding that I do. This is exactly what I would expect to see. Confirmation bias acknowledged. This is exactly what I would expect to see. Now, Jung does not understand that. He is taking it as a perfect example without the full understanding of what is going on. It is amazing. The sentence from the Tabula Smaragdina, he will conquer every subtle thing, Dorn interprets as follows. The subtle thing is Mercurius, or the spiritual obscurities that occupy the mind. In other words, it is spirit. Once again, I will point out that this is confirmation bias being acknowledged. Hence, the darkness is a demon that possesses the spirit, as in Olympodorus, and can be cast out by the word. It is less cast out than it is assimilated. That is important. It expels every subtle thing. 364. That is from Ibid. Sickness is an imprinting of evil, and is healed through the repression of evil by the action of the true and universal center upon the body. And again, that is mostly true. This part's not, right? It is not an imprinting of evil. That is attributing effects to sickness, right? That is saying that the flu has malintent. It doesn't. It just exists. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do, and sometimes that is indeed to kill people. The flu is still deadly. I know in the recent years people have forgotten that, but it always has been. Thousands of people die every year from the flu. It is not evil. However, it is part of the natural processes. Evil is making a decision to go against the betterment of humankind. Murder, adultery, incest, robbery. All of these things, those are evil. Those are against the intrinsic understanding of the law given to you by God. It's written on your heart, right? You know that murder is wrong. Murder is evil. Sickness is just is. It is neutral at best. That is attributing, anthropomorphizing sickness just to make it neutral, right? Much less to say that it is evil. It is not evil. There is nothing evil about sickness. It is a trial. It is a temptation. It is something to overcome. That doesn't make it evil. It doesn't. Healed by the repression of evil, by the action of the true and universal center upon the body, is only partly true as well, right? It's not the repression of evil, right? It is the understanding of the more evil tendencies, right? You do have a tendency towards murder. I don't care who you are. You have thought about killing someone. You have that tendency. It is part of the enlightenment process that you understand that that tendency is a bad one, right? That is the repression of evil. But it is also the understanding that sometimes it is okay to hurt people. In the defense of yourself or others, it is perfectly fine to hurt someone, up to and including taking their life. That isn't murder. If you have to end someone's life because they are dead set on ending someone else's, that's not murder. That is justice. And that is to be done. To turn the other cheek in that particular situation is doing evil. To allow the tyrant to reign and not to take your position of responsibility to bring an end to that is doing evil. And so there is a certain sense of repression of evil. Absolutely, do not go and murder anyone. Do not go and steal from anyone, right? Don't do evil things. Repress that. But understand that even the shadow side has to be utilized. There is a time for pride. There is a time for greed. There is a time for lust. There is a time for all of the vices. And part of this process is that you have to understand that and to willfully use that correctly. All right. But the action of the true and universal center upon the body, right? That would be these chakras. Now, that is not my understanding. I say that there are many true and universal centers. Now, there is the one, but that is the divine that surrounds you, and it is composed of two. So, the center is the unarius, or the one, in which the unitary man is rooted. Now, that can be the divine, right? The center being the divine would be one, right? The spirit, even in its many manifestations, I am a manifestation of the spirit. This tea is a manifestation of the spirit. You are a manifestation of the spirit. Even in those multitude of manifestations, it is still one unit. There is still only the spirit, and the differentiation is merely relative. That is a good understanding of the one, right? That would be the center being the one. Centered upon the divine, not the manifestation of the divine. If, therefore, he is to recover from his bodily and spiritual sickness, let him study to know and to understand exactly the center, and apply himself wholly thereto, and the center will be freed from all imperfections and diseases, that it may be restored to its state of original monarchy. 365 and 366. 365, the center therefore cannot simply be God, since only in man can it be attacked by disease. See, that is the misunderstanding, right? The spirit is the manifestation of God. God was infinite and decided to create and limited himself from the infinite, God, the void, into the finite spirit, logos. That is still one, right? All of the spirit is indeed God, right? All of the spirit is God, but it is not all of God. That is still one. And that is where this intrinsic misunderstanding is, right? The misunderstanding of what the logos is and what the spirit is the root of most of these misunderstandings. All right, 366 was just the Latin from Theatrica. We'll be back at 369. These passages from Dorn refer less to the dangers of the work than to the healing through the outcome of the work. But the means of healing come from Mercurius, that spirit, of whom the philosophers said, take the old black spirits and destroy therewith the bodies until they are changed. The destruction of the bodies is depicted as a battle in the Sermo 42 of the Turba. Exercise war between the copper and the quicksilver, since they strive to perish and first become corrupt. Excite the battle between them and destroy the body of the copper till it becomes powder. This battle is the separatio, divisio, putreficatio, mortificatio, and silentio, which all represent the original chaotic state of conflict between the four hostile elements. Dorn describes this vicious warlike quaternity, allegorically, as the four-horned serpent, which the devil, after his fall from heaven, sought to infix in the mind of men. 369. The devil, seeking to erect them, the horns, into heaven, and being cast down therefrom, attempted thereafter to infix them in the mind of man, namely, ambition, brutality, calumny, and dissension. That is an assumption that is made, that is anthropomorphizing the devil, which is simply the spirit of temptation, the bringer of light, even, with God. That is a completely stupid way of looking at it, in my estimation, right? There is no co-equal to God ever existent ever. That includes on the angelic realm completely. There may have been angels that thought that they were God, but they were not. They may have thought that they were equal to God, but they were not. They were creations of God, and you cannot be equal to the thing that creates you. Therefore, there is no entity that is co-equal to the Creator. This is ascribing to an entity the powers of the Creator, which is not good. It is a bad analogy, even from someone who had some understanding. Dorn puts the motif in a moral plane. Footnote 370. Likewise, the Aquarium Sapientium says, man is placed by God in the furnace of tribulation, and like the hermetic compound, he is troubled at length all kinds of straits, diverse calamities and anxieties, until he die to the old Adam and the flesh, and rise again, as in truth, to the new man. This is not untrue at all. Man is placed by God into the furnace of tribulation. That would be your vessel. This is your furnace of tribulation. It burns with an inner heat. It goes through all kinds of straits, diverse calamities, and anxieties until he dies. That is this. That is the temple. That is the 5D navigation device. That is the meat suit. However you want to look at it. Right? Man is placed by God into the furnace of tribulation. I am in accord with that. I believe that. Right? Even to the point where you have to fix it. Right? Dorn puts the motif of war on a moral plane and thereby approximates it to the modern concept of psychic dissociation, which, as we know, lies at the root of the psychogenic psychoses and neuroses. In the furnace of the cross and in the fire, says the Aquarium Sapientium, man, like the earthly gold, attains to the true black raven's head. That is, he is utterly disfigured and is held in derision by the world. This is another thing. Let's look at this first. 371. Here the author refers to the wisdom of Solomon. Chapter 5, obviously meaning 3 and 4. These are they whom we had some little time in derision and for parable of reproach. We fools esteem their life madness and their end without honor. He also mentions Job 30, where verse 10 would be relevant. They abhor me and flee far from me, and are not afraid to spit in my face. That is possible. Not likely, but possible. In the process of this, and I do not use the cross, but that furnace of the mortal coil, we do have that, right? And in the fire, which would be the refining process, man, like the earthly gold, attains to the true black of the raven's head. I wonder if maybe we would discuss the concept of the void. He is utterly disfigured and held in derision by the world. Now, this part is part of the process. If you are unaware, I'm not the most popular of people. I am perfectly fine with that, right? I say all of the time my channel is open to everyone, but it is not for everyone because I step on toes and people are just stuck in their control systems with no real desire to get out of them. Because of where I am. Because of who I am, because of the steps that I have taken, I no longer fit in. I can no longer do small talk, right? We can talk about the weather for about 2 minutes. We can talk about current events for about the same time. If it is political, I may get a little bit long-winded, but if it is not necessarily political, I don't really care. I don't know any of the cultural references. There's this whole argument about the Super Bowl going on, right? There's this guy that calls himself Bad Bunny, which is some pussy shit to do, by the way. Just saying. And, like, there's this guy that calls himself Bad Bunny, and there's all kinds of people upset because he's going to be playing at the Super Bowl. You know what my response to that is? It makes absolutely no fucking difference to me. I don't watch the Super Bowl. I don't care about sports. I don't care about football. I don't care about baseball. Like, I supported LSU while my son was going there. I supported Southeastern Louisiana while my daughter was going there. But I don't give two shits. I don't care about any of your sports. I don't care about your TV shows. I don't care about your books. I don't care about your random, tasteless discussions. I am sickened by the things. And I don't try to hide that. I am quite open and honest about it. If you comport yourself in such a way, that is fine. That is your choice. I will be the example. I may even discuss it with you. But if that is your decisions, I will disassociate myself from you. Because if I don't, You will disassociate yourself from me and it will be much more violent, right? Not necessarily physically, but this disfigured and held in derision by the world, that is the natural outflow of this process. That gate being so damn narrow, people will not like that you are walking that path. That is a guarantee. There is very little upon this channel that I guarantee. That is a guarantee. If you are on the path of enlightenment, you will no longer comport to the world. And if you no longer comport to the world, they will hold you as disfigured. Even though you are healthy, right? I am healthier than anyone that I know. That is saying a lot, right? A couple of years ago, I was severely disabled. Now, I am healthier than anyone that I know. I run. I don't smoke. I smoke weed. I don't hide things that I do, right? I don't drink alcohol, ever, right? Maybe once a year. In a social situation, I might, but even then, I don't really, right? I'll have a drink, and then I'm fine. I don't need it. I don't do the things of the world, and therefore I am held in derision by the world, and I am fine with that. I am fine with being identified as the person who will not take part in your shit. Does that mean I don't cuss? Obviously not. Does it mean that I don't fuck up? No. I am still a man. I still have my challenges too. One of my major challenges is wrath. I live next to a wrath source. If you were unaware, my neighbor is crazy, right? Literally, like quite literally, could be part of the books, right? Schizophrenic, doesn't take his medicine, goes off at least once a month on a drinking binge, like wild, antagonistic with me and every other neighbor in the area. It is not just me. Right. I'm getting off track. Right? The point is that if you are on this process, you will be held in derision by the world. But that is reciprocal because I hold the world in derision. I find your entertainment absolutely fucking terrible. Absolutely terrible. And this is not only for 40 days and nights, or years, 372. Genesis 8:6. Noah sent forth a raven after 40 days. Genesis 7:7. Rising of the flood. Genesis 7:4. I will reign upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Luke 4. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, being 40 days tempted by the devil. Exodus 34. Moses was with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. Deuteronomy 8. The children of Israel wandered the 40 years in the wilderness. This one almost certainly did not happen. The other ones are debatable as well, right? But from the text, other than this one line, it is very hard to find any corroborating evidence for that at all. Up to and including, and I'm definitely going to put this in here. I wasn't going to, but I'm definitely going to put this in here. There was roughly 3 million people walking through the desert, right? There was 600,000 fighting men. There was their spouses, which they would have had if they were fighting men, which puts us at 1.2 million. And then if we look at 2 children each, that is 2.4 million. Then you have the elderly, then you have the youth who are not married, and all of these others, right? Roughly 3 million people left Egypt with animals. Do you think that they found enough forage for the animals in the desert, right? This is the desert of Saudi Arabia. This is the desert just to the east of Midian. It is desolate. And by desolate, I mean there is not anything, right? There's not a lot of brush that grows. There is wide expanses of no forage whatsoever. Do you really think that they brought the goats and the cows through that and it was perfectly fine? God provided fodder? Really? Okay, do you, boo. Right? And then there's reports of them staying in place in the desert for days, at least weeks and months sometimes. Really? You didn't just completely destroy any forage that might have happened to have been there by doing that? There's a lot of problems in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. You should check it out. 40 days or nights or years, but often for the whole duration of his life. Well, from the time you get there until the end. So much so that he experiences more heartache in his life than comfort and joy, and more sadness than pleasure. Through this spiritual death, his soul is entirely freed. We'll be back to that. That is a reference to Musetta Hermetica. Okay. Here's the thing, right? If you are attached to the mortal in the way that I am not, like we just talked about, I am perfectly fine with you being derisive of me. I am derisive of you. Not you in particular, right? I'm perfectly fine with that. If you, however, are on this path and you are not fine with that, then this part is true, right? The whole duration of your life. More heartache than comfort and joy. More sadness than pleasure. That was Nietzsche's problem, right? We did Thus Spake Zarathustra, and what we discovered from that was that this was Nietzsche's problem. He was holding himself to a standard that is remarkably close to the one that I hold myself to. And he was even achieving it, kind of, for the most part. But he was severely depressive because he expected other people to take his example, to take where he was and run with it. And when that did not happen, he experienced severe heartache. He lost all of his friends. He went into isolation at a lake in a mountain, away from everyone, right? No comfort and joy. More sadness than pleasure. But if you are like me, right, I am on this path. I'm held in derision by the world. But I do not experience more heartache in my life than I do comfort and joy. At all. Not even close. I experience comfort and joy and pleasure pretty much all day, every day. Literally, if I'm not trying to force myself to watch entertainment or to be involved in that crap, I am perfectly fine. Do I still have issues? Yes, right? But that doesn't mean that my life is more sadness than pleasure. It is not, by a long shot. Right? If you are experiencing more sadness than pleasure, you are doing life wrong. If I was doing so, I would not be on this path. I would have went a different route entirely. In fact, the comfort, the joy, and the pleasure that I have found from this has exceeded everything that I have ever experienced ever in my life. Through his spiritual death, the soul is entirely freed. Evidently, the Negretto brought about a deformation in a psychic suffering which the author compared to the plight of the unfortunate Job. Job's unmerited misfortune visited on him by God is the suffering of God's servant and prefiguration of Christ's passion. Okay, so, in the Bible, there were 3 perfect people, right? There was Enoch. Enoch was perfect in his generations and was therefore caught up to God. There was Christ, who was sacrificed for the redemption of mankind, which I don't believe, but is the story. And then there was Job. Job was described by God as the perfect man taking the perfect action. And he was not, like, his misfortune, according to the book, right? This is one of those problems. According to the book, this misfortune was not visited upon him by God. It was allowed by God, but it was visited upon him by the devil. Right? Now that is the anthropomorphication of the darker tendencies, which is intrinsically still part of God. I don't believe in the anthropomorphication. And so for me, it was visited upon him by God. But for the book, for the reference that is being used, that is not the case. What is being stated in that book is that there was God, and then there was a co-equal to God who went and talked face to face with God and obtained permission to tempt this perfect man. There are a lot of problems with Job. One of the problems with Job is that it comes from at least 3 sources, none of which appear to be Jewish at all. And again, I refer you to the text which I read aloud to the internet. One can see from this how and there was no point in Job where you can see a prefiguration of Christ's passion at all. One can see from this how the figure of the Son of Man gradually lodged itself in the ordinary man who had taken the work upon his own shoulders. And again, I refer you to the tendency of the Catholic Church to kill people. In the 2nd century of our era, Wai Po Yang, quite uninfluenced by Western alchemy and unhampered by the preconceptions of our Christian psychology, gave a drastic account of the sufferings caused by a technical blunder during the opus. Disaster will come to the Black Mass. Gases from food consumed will make noises inside the intestines and stomach. The right essence will be exhaled and the evil one inhaled. Days and nights will be passed without sleep, moon after moon. The body will then be tired out, giving rise to an appearance of insanity. The 100 pulses will stir and boil so violently as to drive away peace of mind and body. Ghostly things will make their appearance, at which he will marvel even in his sleep. He is then led to rejoice, thinking that he is assured of longevity. But all of a sudden, he is seized by an untimely death. An ancient Chinese treatise on alchemy. See the motif of torture and transformation symbolism in the Mass. I don't know that this is... right. Disaster will come to the Black Mass. That is assuming that your body is going to be the Black Mass, right? Gases from food consumed will make noises inside of the intestines and stomach. That is indigestion. Right? You can alleviate that. Mint is a wonderful help. The right essence will be exhaled and the evil one inhaled. Like, this is something, right? But without the full context of everything, I'm not going to try and break it down, right? It is something, but I don't know that it is exactly what he was trying to purvey here. So we can understand why Kunrath writes, "But chiefly pray to God for the good gift of discretion, the good spirit of discriminating good from evil, who may lead thee into true knowledge and understanding of the light of nature, into our great book. So wilt thou extricate thyself from the labyrinth of the very, very many deceitful papers, and even books of parchment which arrive right well at the ground of truth." Yeah. This is where I started, right? When I began, I started asking for discernment, right? Discernment and discretion, pretty much the same thing. I started asking for discernment and wisdom. That was part of my prayer when I began, right? The main focus of it. And that was when I started getting the ability to discern in the way that I do. And so, chiefly pray to God, that 100%. For the good gift of discretion, 90%. The good spirit of discriminating good from evil, that is the gift of discretion, right? That does lead to true knowledge and understanding. What are we doing here? We are discerning what is good in this and what is not. Now, that is using my discernment. That is using my understanding of things. And I believe that it is a good one. I believe that I rationalize it well enough. That I speak the reasons why to such a degree that it is understandable, even if you disagree with me, where I came from. That is leading to true knowledge. Can I be corrected? Absolutely. Why? Because I am seeking true knowledge. Not knowledge that has been passed down for generations, necessarily, but instead knowledge that can be used. I have used the knowledge. The depressions of the adept are also described in the Tractus Aureus. "My son, this is the hidden stone of many colors, which is born in one color. Know this and conceal it. By this the Almighty, favoring the greatest diseases, are escaped, and every sorrow." 376. 376 is, instead of tristitia, the usual synonym for negretto is melancholia. Okay. Instead of sorrow, melancholia. "And every sorrow, distress, evil, and hurtful thing is made to depart. It leads from darkness to light, from this desert wilderness to secure habitation, and from poverty and straits into freedom." 377. From the Chemica. I am not in disagreement with that at all, right? This, again, is confirmation bias acknowledged, exactly what I would look for. The hidden stone of many colors, born in one color. Yeah. Know it and conceal it. Yeah. The Almighty favoring the greatest diseases are escaped. That Almighty favoring, that is an important part of that. That is taking into account the bottlenecks, and every sorrow, distress, evil, and hurtful thing made to depart. Do I not talk about finding the gold in the shitty situations? Do I not live that out? And that is not to put me as a perfect example, but I am an example. I am intentionally putting myself in public because of that. These testimonies suffice to show that the adept was not only included in his work, but also knew it. And that is going to bring us to the end of chapter 6, or part 6. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I am here to discern. I asked for this path. I asked for the discernment, and I was given it. I asked for a path to follow to show other people, and I was given it. That is why this channel is where it is. Now, you can make arguments that maybe I'm doing the wrong thing. You can. I have not had growth in the last year. In the last 10 months, right? We've grown about 900 people, which is amazing. I'm blessed upon it. But we should have been at 5,000 on this channel in January. We should be pushing 7,000 on this channel right now. And it can definitely be made the argument that I made the wrong choice. I followed where I felt I had to go. Even if I don't get the physical results of people coming and subscribing to the channel, of like, sharing, and all of the things, even if that doesn't happen, I still have to walk the path. I asked for this path. My feet have been placed upon it, and I feel like I walk it fairly well. I don't try to get into the realm of speculation unless I am saying it is speculation. If it is speculation, I reason it. I rationalize why I am speculating. I don't just come wildly out of the blue. We are seeking the true knowledge. If that means that I am incorrect, that maybe there are 9 chakras and not 7, I'm willing to be corrected on that, right? It might only be 5. It might be 3. I might have a completely wrong understanding. But the understanding that I have is what has allowed me to heal myself in real ways, right? I used to wake up every single day trying to decide whether I wanted to live. And not because of sadness, but because it hurts, right? If you have not woken up in pain every day, let me tell you, it is not a desirable experience. To wake up every single day in a point of pain that most people cannot function in and still go about and do is not a pleasant process. It sucks. It is terrible. I hated it. And every single day I had to make the decision if I was going to stay. It would not be unusual for me to go home. I tried a couple of times before. That is no longer an option to me because of the path that I am upon. But also in addition to that, the path that I am upon has allowed me to heal myself. I don't wake up at a 7 or an 8 on a pain scale every day. I wake up at a 0 or a 1 if I have overextended myself. That is a massive difference. That is a difference that I can't even quantify other than to say that. To wake up not wanting to quit breathing is amazing. I cannot do anything other than walk the path that has allowed me to do that in my life. To take upon myself the responsibility to relay that is a big deal. This is so far out of my comfort zone. This is so far past anything that I thought that I would ever do. But I have a choice, but this is the more preferable choice. It is the harder one. It is so hard to walk this. Like, I am going to be alone for most of it, right? There may be some people who align themselves with me for a while, but I hold some rather unconventional beliefs quite firmly, right? And in my real life, for me to associate with me in real life, you have to be okay with this, right? You have to be at the understanding that I'm not going to have the lesser understanding. And yet, I will allow you to, and by allow, I don't mean like I am in charge of you, right? You can have your opinions. You can have your path. You can walk it in a completely different way than I do. But if it aligns against where I am, we will not walk together. And that's where I'm going to wrap this one up, right? I just wanted to point out that this is a difficult path, but it is worth it. It is absolutely worth it to wake up without the sorrow, right? There are sorrowful things in my life. Like, I normally don't talk about this too much, but like, we're broke folk over here. I have a home, we have food, but we don't have extras, right? It is a battle every single day. Are we going to pay a bill or are we going to buy food? Are we going to do this or are we going to do that? We have to make decisions that a lot of people don't, right? We don't get extras. We are bare minimum over here. And that is in part because I have been disabled for so long, and I am at the point now where I want to go to work. But God keeps telling me no. I keep getting pulled away from that possibility. If I try, I get hurt again. And so I'm not trying. I want all the Social Security disability so bad. This grind that I'm on is part of that. But the only way, like, this grind is going to continue despite the deprivation. Despite the fact that we don't have enough to eat, that some of our bills are not paid, that we do not have financial abundance, because that's not the reward, right? The reward is that I get to wake up every day and love my life. I get to wake up every day looking forward to exercising. I wake up every day looking forward to learning new things with you, to having these discussions, to exploring these ideas. I wake up in anticipation of that. This is what I want in my life, right? That is the outflow of this. The outflow of this is positive. The outflow of this is growth and healing. Not just physical healing, but emotional healing as well. If you have not been a person who has chosen depression, then you don't understand that. But I don't choose depression or anxiety. I don't choose these things. Now, do I have episodes of depression? Yes, things are not perfect, but it is very brief, right? It is more of a sadness than a depression, right? I do get anxious about whether I can pay my bills or not, but I know that it's going to be all right. I'm working towards something. It will pan out or it won't, right? Either way, it is part of the plan, and I'm not stressing it. That is unusual, right? To be facing adverse circumstances and it's still like, okay, whatever. In the hospital, April 28th, I went to the hospital. My neighbor, the crazy guy, broke my leg. In the hospital, I'm already at the point where I'm making the gold out of it, right? Within hours. My doctors are like, this guy is wild, right? How can you be here with all of this damage in your leg and be this positive? It's because of the life I live. It is because of the truth that resides in me. And I am trying to relay that truth to you. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of my book, or reaching out to contact me directly through the links provided down below. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.